could hear that music was very avant-garde. It was very funk fusion, which jazz fusion was very big at the time. This is the late 1970s. Weather Report sold 500,000 albums. The Mahavishnu Orchestra sold 1 million albums. Return to Forever sold, several hundreds of thousands of albums. Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters were gold records. This instrumental music that had some of the greatest jazz masters of that time. Weather Report had Wayne Shorter and Joe Zawinul, right? Both alumni of the Miles Davis group, the classic quintet of, Wayne Shorter with the classic quintet, and then Zawinul later on in a silent way. Chick Corea was certainly in the Miles Davis group in the late 60s, 68. He had Jack DeJohnette on drums and Dave Holland on bass. And I think Stephen Grossman at some point came in and replaced Wayne Shorter. And then Herbie Hancock, also with Miles Davis in the classic quintet with Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, and Miles, one of the 2 or 3 most important groups, certainly one of the 2 most important jazz groups of the 1960s, but overall one of the most important jazz groups. Mahavishnu Orchestra, John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin is on multiple Miles Davis albums, Jack Johnson, a few other albums. He has a song Miles named a song after him. So you notice here that there is a through line here of all of these people that were doing this sort of jazz fusion music were graduates of the Miles Davis experience. They all were the best young players of their generation. And then when they went out into the world, they chose a certain kind of music. Let's talk about that for a minute, right? So Miles Davis was playing with his quintet, and they were working like 40 weeks a year. They would do 2 weeks at the Keystone Corner in San Francisco. They'd play 2 weeks at the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach in Los Angeles. They'd be playing at Birdland for a week in Manhattan, the old Birdland. They'd be playing at the Village Vanguard. They'd be going to Europe and playing concerts. They'd be playing in clubs in Montmartre and in Paris and in Ronnie Scott's in London, if that was in existence then. And then he got put on the bill at the Fillmore East with a bunch of rock groups. And he made more money on that one concert than he would make in a month playing in clubs. And he saw the reaction that young people were getting and the way that the younger rock bands were getting from the crowd. He also saw the way that they dressed. And he decided to change his music. They'd all been wearing sport jackets, ties, suits and ties to perform. And then at some point, the dress code got loose. Very colorful clothes came in. The music started getting funkier, rock influenced. The acoustic piano was gone, replaced by the Fender Rhodes. The acoustic bass was gone, replaced by the electric bass. My Funny Valentine was not played anymore. Miles, at some point, he had a group that had all musicians that were funk-oriented, except for Keith Jarrett, who could play any kind of music. But he was playing in Miles's group, and there was a situation where they played a concert, and all the electricity went out. Miles had to play duets with Keith Jarrett because Keith, the only music they could play were the old tunes, and Keith was the only one who knew them. So even if the bass player had an acoustic bass there, he wouldn't be able to play. The guitar player didn't know how to play those things. So even if he had an acoustic guitar, he wouldn't be able to play. The result of this was that more people started hearing instrumental, complex music with lots of improvisation in it. And that led directly to Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters. That led to Weather Report. That led to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. That led to Return to Forever. Chick Corea is so what Herbie Hancock did after he left Miles was that he started touring with a group called Mawandishi, and they all wore dashikis, and he played electric piano on a lot of cuts, but they still had Buster Williams was playing bass, and they also had a guy named Ralph Gleason, a San Francisco-based musician who was an expert on using the ARP 2600 synthesizer. Herbie started using synthesizers live, and Ralph would play with them. And a lot of this music was sort of like this very interesting blend of music that's based on African rhythms with sort of electronics in it. You know, they were basically touring around in a van playing for very little money. And then Chick Corea, after he left Miles Davis, he started playing with Dave Altschul and with Barry Altschul on drums and Dave Holland. They had a trio called ARC. And it was very, very avant-garde, very out there piano trio music. And I loved that music, right? I loved the Mawandishi music. And so then they got Anthony Braxton in the group and they called it Circle. And you know, I went to a community college for a little while before I came to Queens. Every year at the end of the semester, the school record store, at the end of every semester, they would have a big sale. So you could buy records for 50 cents. So I bought the Keith Jarrett, the Bremen, Lausanne, 3 or 4 record set for $1. I bought the Colin concert for $1, Facing You for like 50 cents, right? These are like incredible piano albums. I bought Chick Corea, Piano Improvisations 1 and 2 for 50 cents. I bought Crystal Silence for 50 cents. I bought the first 2 Return to Forever albums, Return to Forever and Light as a Feather, which was the trio that Chick Corea started after he had these very avant-garde bands. I'm going to move away from my story, but you know, I got exposed to all this different music because it was so cheap to purchase this stuff. Chick went to the Felt Forum, which is the Paramount attached to Madison Square Garden. It used to be called the Felt Forum back in the day. And he saw the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And he was just like in awe of how crowded it was and how everybody was, the group was into it. And he was also in awe of the sheer volume coming off the stage and how it was physically affecting everybody. And so then he decided at that point that he wanted to make more accessible music. So he started Return to Forever. And the first 2 Return to Forevers are very Brazilian oriented. They've got Ayrton, a Brazilian percussionist playing drums, and his wife, Flora Purim, singing. And she didn't speak any English. She only spoke Portuguese. So there were songs with lyrics, and they had to phonetically teach her how to sing the songs. Then Stanley Clarke played upright bass, and Joe Farrell played saxophone. He's a French jazz musician, and alto sax. So those are the first 2 albums. But then at some point, he switched to the next iteration of Return to Forever, which had Bill Connors on electric guitar, Stanley Clarke on electric bass, and Lenny White on drums. And Chick was playing electric piano and started playing synthesizers live. So, and the goal here was to reach more people. You know, I did a lot of commercial playing to get through college, but I was always doing this other wild stuff, whenever I could in public, and playing for no money for that stuff, like on an off night, Monday and Tuesday nights. If I was playing in bars, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'd take my off nights and I'd try to, play trio gigs with people and do all sorts of weird stuff like that music you heard at the beginning of the class. What ended up happening was I went out into the world and I started working as a keyboard player. And then, in the 1990s, I decided I'd sort of like reached the pinnacle of where I could go in terms of being what was available and being a freelance keyboard player in New York City, right? I was the keyboard player in a huge hit Broadway show, Miss Saigon, first keyboard player. I didn't want to be a conductor. I had already done that when I was younger. I didn't like the responsibility. And I decided at that point that my life going forward for the next 30 years could be a series of me going from one show to the next and it all being the same thing over and over again. So I wanted to so I decided, let me start working on my composing. It's something I always wanted to do, and I haven't really taken it seriously. I'd written music, but I wanted to study it more formally, so I came back and I got my master's degree, and then I started working towards a doctorate. And what happened was that during when I was getting my master's degree in composition from Queens with Professor Musgrave, who was a great teacher, and I took classes with Jimmy Heath, also, who was a great teacher. My thesis was a string quartet, right? And I spent 4 months writing 6 minutes of music. I didn't think the piece was very good. It got performed twice, and it's on my bookshelf, the score. Never going to get performed again. I have a recording of it that I have very difficult to listen to. And, I started taking these other classes, and I said, you know what? I don't want to do this either. I want to do music that could be heard. And so then at that point, I decided that I started trying to find my way into the world of film and television music, because you could be a trained musician and write intricate music and have it heard against picture, right? And so the reason I'm telling you this is that this whole, and it gave me great pleasure to do that, right? And so my whole thing is that I want to write music that's heard. I want people to be heard. I want to tell stories. And like, for example, my World Cup theme has been on air since 2016. And it's been, there's been over like 2 billion listeners. So when people talk about, like, I've got 1 million Spotify streams, yeah, well, talk to me 2 million times that, right? Or whatever it is, 200 million times that. And we've been working this whole semester on esoteric concepts with music, right? We've been working on capturing strange sounds, treating them and making them odd, and doing all these sort of like things that you might want to do if you were going to get a PhD in electronic music, and you'd learn how to treat sounds and do all this stuff. And there's multiple reasons for me teaching you this. And one of them is to learn what tools are available to you inside of a computer and what you can do with sound. Learn how to navigate around a digital audio workstation, but also to stretch your mind so that you start thinking about possibilities. And in your own music that you might want to write, you might not do these techniques, but you might start listening and thinking about music differently.